Okay, I want to get you right into Docker, but before we get to Docker, we got to actually have Docker. We got to install it. And in order to install it, you need to know which edition you need to put on your machine. And so we're going to go through that real quick. Basically, there's a dozen or more editions of Docker now. Those are different flavors, basically, for different operating systems. And we need to go through real quick in this lecture and then the few lectures after it, which one you're going to use for the course, and you figure out which one that's going to be, and then you jump to the lecture that will set you up and install it and then configure it properly for this course. And we also are going to learn real quick about the difference between the free community edition Docker, that's Docker CE, and then the EE version, the enterprise edition. We won't actually cover much of that in this course. It's a paid version and it's usually for larger business, but we'll touch on it every so often, but you won't be using it in this course. We're going to be using totally free software. You're also going to learn real quick what stable and edge are and how the releases are done and which versions you should use. Okay, so we got to get you figured out to which one you're going to use and how you're going to use it. Well, do realize that Docker is not just a simple point and click installation sometimes, because it's actually a much bigger product than it was 4 years ago. They've added a whole bunch of features that manage and solve a whole bunch of problems. So do realize that sometimes it seems a little more to install it than what is necessary because it's now such a bigger thing than a container runtime. It also moves really fast, right? The container ecosystem is red hot with innovation on a yearly basis, and sometimes it's even hard to keep up when you're in the industry. So do realize that your version matters, and you need to make sure that you're on the most recent version. And if you follow the directions at the store, or if you follow my videos here, we'll get you there. Docker CE is the version we're going to focus on in this course. That is the free open source toolkit that is full of features and can get you from dev all the way through to production. There is another version called Docker EE, or Enterprise Edition, and we'll get to that in a second. There are three major types. So I like to break down the different editions, of which there's now over a dozen of, into three major types of installs. The first one is you're just installing it directly on a supported operating system, meaning that it runs on that kernel and that OS, and it's supported. Mostly until 2016, it was really just Linux. And then we started seeing innovations where the Raspberry Pi could use it, and we saw it on mainframes, and other Linux variants or Unix variants started to use it. And then Windows Server 2016 supported it natively. So that's pretty exciting on the Windows side. But that's the direct method. On Mac and Windows 10, I would call this not the direct method, but more of a suite of tools, including a GUI and settings, preferences, and all that, to make it really easy for you to develop Linux containers or now Windows containers on either one of those operating systems, because the Mac natively doesn't support Docker. So what has to happen in the background on the Mac, and also for Windows 10, is a small virtual machine has to be started by Docker to run the containers in. Okay, it's transparent to you most of the time. You're never going to know it's there, but that is part of those editions, and so they are a little bit different. Then the last option is the cloud. And the cloud is really when I would say AWS, Azure, or Google versions. So Docker for AWS, for example. And those versions come with Docker installed on Linux usually, but they also come with features specific to that cloud vendor. So on the AWS side, it'll come with the CloudFormation template. It'll come with persistent storage options for storing your databases. It'll come with features that automatically update elastic load balancers and all those things that you would care about if you were in AWS. The same can be said for Azure and pretty soon Google Cloud once it graduates from beta. So those three different types of installs all come together to support a full lifecycle of Docker options. In this course, we're really going to be focusing mostly on the Docker for Mac, Docker for Windows, and installing Linux locally if you're on a Linux machine for local development and testing. At the end, we will start to create swarms in the cloud, and then I'll give you options at that point on how to do that. So a real quick note on the differences between CE and EE and stable versus edge. So we mentioned that the Docker version we're really using, or the edition I guess we're going to be using, is Docker Community Edition, and that's CE. That's the free open source version. The other version, Docker EE, is Docker Enterprise Edition, and it's a paid version that you pay per node, and it's not necessarily ideal for the independent developer or the single person. It's really better for larger organizations that have lots of servers they need to run, and they need maybe a management GUI or LDAP authentication for Active Directory, or maybe they just need 24/7 phone support. And you can buy that on a monthly, I believe, and a yearly subscription, and you do get a lot for it. So they certify that EE version on specific versions of Linux and Windows, and then the Docker CE has a broader support where they generally test it a little bit on a bigger set of platforms. You'll see all those at the store when you go to download it. If you're curious about the pricing of the Enterprise Edition, you can go to docker.com/pricing. Again, we're not going to discuss a whole lot about that in this course. We will mention it a few times, but you can check that out. And one last thing real quick, we just want to discuss the difference between the support lifecycle and the versioning of CE, EE, and what stable versus Edge means. So Edge actually means beta in the Docker world, and it comes out every month, and unfortunately it's only supported for a month until the next beta comes out. I personally run Edge on my laptop because I like to test new Docker things. You may not want to do that. When you're downloading Docker by default, you will get the stable version that comes out once a quarter. You'll also notice that it actually looks like it's supported for 4 months on the stable version, because it kind of gives you that 1 month to actually install the next quarterly stable update before they stop updating the previous one. Of course, if you want to pay for EE, you get way longer support life cycles and patches for whatever version you decide to install.